There's plenty of eyes on Washington, but let's take a look at what's happening at the state level. This is the Issues Watch podcast. Hi, I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the Issues Watch podcast. In addition to the presidential and congressional elections this year, 44 states have legislative elections, though New Jersey isn't one of them. State legislatures have much more power than many folks realize. For example, there are no national professional licensing laws or national regulatory bodies for those professions. All the professions are regulated by the individual states. Another factor that many people are unaware of is that the extent to which legislation pending in other states influences what other state lawmakers do. For example, what happens in New York, Pennsylvania, or California can have a big impact on what our lawmakers do in New Jersey. So today we're going to talk with Bill Kramer, Vice President and Counsel at MultiState. His firm tracks politics and lawmaking in all of the states. We'll take a look at what's happening across the country in two hot topics: artificial intelligence and privacy rights. Bill is recognized for his wide breadth of state legislative and policy knowledge. He oversees the firm's research services, advises clients on strategic government affairs initiatives, develops and manages coalitions and associations, and he also pens the weekly Morning MultiState newsletter. Welcome, Bill. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here, Jeff.
In the absence of federal legislation, states have begun to regulate artificial intelligence. Here in New Jersey, most of the activity seems to be centered around setting up task forces and study commissions so the state can be prepared when AI is really up and running. What about other states? Which states are taking the lead, and how might those states influence policy in New Jersey?
Yeah, this is obviously a very hot issue right now for legislatures. So we've been watching this issue. We do legislative tracking for clients on this issue. Last year, we saw about 130, 150 bills, and many of those bills were kind of this AI study committee type bill. So New Jersey's in good company there. They're, along with 30 other states, have set up their own task force or committee to look into this issue and make recommendations to lawmakers on policy. So that's been kind of the first stage of things. This year, we've really seen that expand. So we've been watching about 700 bills across the states and another 100, 150 bills in Congress introduced related to AI. And a big chunk of these, besides these kind of study committee bills, have been more narrow focused bills. And I'd say about 300 of them, so nearly half of the bills you've seen introduced in the states, are actually targeting deep fakes, which are these fake images, videos, audio of the classic example is you could do a deep fake of me. It looks exactly like the video you're seeing. It sounds exactly like me, but it's saying things that I've never said. And it's very easy to create a person that way and actually replicate an actual person. So a lot of these, there's two main areas where states are most worried about this, and this is in the political arena. So, a lawmaker that's running for office or a candidate running for office, if a video goes viral of them saying something that they didn't, it could be a big problem. So states have acted on political deepfakes, trying to limit the use of something like that. And then the other side of that is sexual deepfakes. So keeping real people from being created in a deepfake and spread along the community that way. So those are two areas where another over half the states have actually enacted legislation. So we now have 32 states that have enacted something to help restrict the use and spread of deep fakes. Some of this is like putting on watermarks to make sure that political campaign can still maybe use it, but it's got to be very clear that this is not real. That's been a really big issue for state lawmakers. You asked about who is kind of leading here. I would say that the study committees, the deepfake stuff, everyone's kind of jumping on that. There's a handful of states that are doing something, looking to do something a little bit more with AI. I would point to Colorado and Utah being two states that actually enacted laws this year that did something beyond kind of this deepfake and studies and investments in AI. Utah passed a series of bills. Some of them are deepfake bills, but there was one called the AI Policy Act, and it puts on some disclosure requirements that if a company or a licensed organization is using AI to make any decisions or to interact with consumers, then they need to either proactively tell the consumer that AI is being used, or in some cases, depending on what industry they're talking about, reactively, if somebody asks if AI is being used, then yes, they have to tell the consumer and customer that that's being used. So that's one strategy that states have used, is this disclosure transparency angle. We want it's a little bit low stakes as far as, it's not going to interfere too much with the use of AI, but you have to be transparent about it. So it adds some policy protections and consumer protections in that way without disrupting, the development of the technology itself, which lawmakers are trying to hit a balance between letting this technology develop while also protecting consumers from potential misuse.
Right, and that's that's the refrain that I've heard about balance. Because as you probably know better than anybody, lawmakers, many of them at least, are always racing to be out front to announce that they are tackling the toughest issue, the newest, hottest, whatever. And obviously, AI is right up there with hot issues, and yet we really don't know to a large extent what exactly AI is going to look like, how it's going to be used. And so I know there was a lot of concern here in New Jersey, the business community, that they would be in New Jersey, running out, writing, laws to legislate and regulate this and that. And we wouldn't even know what they were regulating and legislating yet. But so, yeah, that is something I've definitely heard. So let me move on to another issue I know you're familiar with. The American Privacy Rights Act, which was, this year's attempt to legislate national data privacy protections, would establish a framework for data privacy rights for Americans and effectively eliminate the patchwork of state data privacy laws that have been passed in absence of a federal mandate. What's the status of this bill, and do you think states would push back if it starts moving, or it's enacted, or what will happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. States have been active on data privacy legislation since California passed their ballot measure in 2020. And since then, about 20 states have enacted their own comprehensive data privacy laws. California's is probably the most aggressive. Virginia came out with one that a lot of states have copied. It's a little bit moderate, according to industry and privacy rights folks. And that's kind of that's spread pretty quickly. And anytime you have a situation where states have slightly different laws, it becomes a difficulty to follow those laws if you're a national organization. And data privacy obviously doesn't know the bounds of the borders of different states. So, there's been a lot of effort to come up with a national standard and have Congress enact a law. And the American Privacy Rights Act has been introduced. It's still in the House. There was a lot of excitement when it was introduced, but from my understanding, it hasn't really gone anywhere. There's always the lame duck session where things can move, and then obviously with a new Congress and a new president next year, we could see something. It could be a part of kind of the next agenda items. But a lot of excitement there. I haven't seen much movement. anything can happen in Congress, but I would keep an eye on it. But I think they're going to get pushback, particularly from like maybe members in California who, this current version of this bill preempts state laws. So California is going to say, we don't want this because it's going to preempt our more aggressive laws, and we would like to have those larger protections in place. They might have maybe members in Congress from the California delegation might argue that instead of setting a floor for data privacy regulations, maybe this should it should set a floor instead of a ceiling. Sorry, where allow the states to do more aggressive data privacy regulations than Congress, but the current law goes the other way, where it actually preempts and would block state laws that are more aggressive than the federal law if it was to pass, which is a big question mark at this point.
Right. So I guess that it's always hard to get anything through Congress or any state legislature, let alone during an election year. But does this bill have bipartisan support?
It was introduced by bipartisan Republican and Democrat. So it is one of those issues that is a little bit more bipartisan. It's hard to tell these days. I think everything can turn into a partisan issue pretty quickly in Congress.
Right. So let's move on to another issue. Obviously, as we've discussed, there's a big national election coming up. But as I said before, a lot of very important legislation comes out of state legislatures, not Washington, D.C. Now, New Jersey doesn't have any state legislative elections this year, but 44 states do. Which state legislatures are in play in November, and do you think we'll see any flip parties?
Well, as we've seen, in the past month or the month post the debate, a lot can change in elections pretty quickly. So we still have 3 months left before election day as of this recording, and there could be a lot going on. The states, there's a lot of state legislative races. You said 44 states. 86 legislative chambers, so thousands of state lawmakers up for election. But I'm currently watching 6 or 7 states where there could be actual party change in control of the legislative chamber. And I can kind of quickly run through those.
Sure, great.
A couple of those are a result of the last election cycle. So in 2022, Democrats took control of the Minnesota legislature, the Michigan legislature. So they have slim majorities there. And they also took control of the Pennsylvania House, while the Pennsylvania Senate still has control of Republicans. So those are 3 chambers. Basically, the House in all of those chambers are going to be up for grabs just because of the fact that they have Democrats currently have a 1 to 3 seat majority in those chambers. So those are also places where projections don't think that the Senate in Pennsylvania is going to be super competitive, although there's a chance. And then the Minnesota, Michigan House don't have their Senates up for elections. So those are 2 states, Michigan and Minnesota, where Democrats have new trifectas, and they've been very effective in passing new legislation. And just for your listeners' sake, a trifecta is what we call in the industry kind of when one party controls the governor's seat and then both chambers of the legislature. So they've had complete control there. So Republicans are hoping to break up that control by winning a majority in the House in Minnesota and Michigan. Another one to keep an eye out is Arizona. Republicans have held on to a 1-seat majority in Arizona in both chambers, both the Senate and the House. So Democrats will try once again to gain a majority in the Arizona legislature. And if they're able to do it, they would get a new trifecta because they won the governor's seat in 2022. So that could be a very important one if they can gain control there. Republicans will continue to try to block that. Another one that will be interesting that is perpetually interesting is the New Hampshire House. New Hampshire House has 400 members. It's the 4th largest legislative body in the world, behind the U.S. Congress, British Parliament, and the Indian Parliament. So that kind of tells you how volatile a 400-member House for a relatively small state could go. So Republicans currently have anywhere, it changes by the day, it seems like, but anywhere from a 2 to maybe a 10 seat majority in that House. So that one is basically always up for grabs. I would also watch that state for potentially a trifecta switch, which is, currently Republicans control the Senate, the House, and the governor's mansion. The current popular Republican governor, Governor Sununu, is retiring. It's going to be an open seat. There's Democrats have a decent chance of capturing the governor's mansion and then potentially flipping the House and maybe the Senate. They have less chance there, but it's possible. So that's one to keep an eye out for, from going from a Republican trifecta to a Democratic trifecta, which you don't always see. And then last is a little bit of a funny case. Alaska has been under a bipartisan coalition control in the legislature for several cycles. Republicans have more members than Democrats. However, the moderate Republicans have allied themselves with independents and some of the Democrats to actually form a majority and to control the legislature. It was in the House for a while, and the Senate now is joined too. So both chambers are under these kind of bipartisan control. So it's a little goofy politically up Alaska, but that could always change depending on if some of the independents lose or if Republicans gain enough conservative members to break up those coalitions. We never really know about Alaska until January or February, when they actually form and make votes to form a government.
So they actually, in Alaska, like the independents are officially independent in the sense that they're not considered formally Republicans or Democrats. They just
Yeah, I believe there's actually some independent, like I don't know if it's registered independent or just registered
Right.
non-party. Actual independents. There's a handful of them.
That's interesting. It makes Alaska government kind of like European government,
Not quite parliament, but it's as close as we're going to get in our system.
Okay, that's great. So, just one last question about all these state legislative races. I mean, we all know that in Congress, the top of the ticket, the presidential race, has a lot of impact on what happens in the Senate and House races. Is there going to be, you see these state legislative seats, being very sensitive to what happens on the presidential level, or they sort of work their way up in their own little bubble?
It's hard to tell at this point. I think governors are one of the only elections that are somewhat separated from the national debates. People tend to know who their governor is, and they tend to, we see a lot more cross-party governors. So you see, the Hogans in Maryland and Baker in Massachusetts. You see, Bashir in Kentucky, and you see a lot more red states vote for moderate Democratic governors, and blue states vote for moderate Republican governors. I think part of that is because people are paying attention to their governors, and they actually, it's easier to vote for a moderate, whereas they don't necessarily know even their local. Most people don't know who their state rep is. They don't know who their house rep is, state house rep. So because of that, they're just going to vote party line a lot of times. And that's kind of what we see in the results, is that there is a big swing if they decide to go, one party down the ticket to go that way. But you do see some crossover in the governor's races, which, it used to be more like that for other races, but that's what it's like today.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, Bill. This has been great, and I hope we can have you on again. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks for listening or watching. For legislative news and information on the bills the NJCPA is tracking, visit njcpa.org/advocacy.